Happy hauntings, horror fans, and welcome to this week's episode of Megan's Murder Movies. I'm your host, Megan, and this week we are jumping right into Dr. Sleep. We did The Shining last week. If you've not listened to that one or seen The Shining, I definitely recommend it because there's a lot of callbacks to that film. This definitely is, it is a sequel from the Stephen King universe, so if you've not listened to that one, I definitely would recommend that before jumping into this one because there'll be a lot of things that I'll be talking about that you might be confused with. But without further ado, let's jump into it with a summary. So, struggling with alcoholism, Dan Torrance remains traumatized by the sinister events that occurred at the Overlook Hotel when he was a child. His hopes for a peaceful existence soon become shattered when he meets Abra, a teen who shares his extrasensory gift of the shine. Together they form an unlikely alliance to battle the True Knot, a cult whose members try and feed off of the shine of innocence to become immortal. So now that we've got a summary, we can jump into a cast breakdown. We're going to start off with the director, who also did the screenplay for this, Mike Flanagan. Mike is an American filmmaker and partner in Intrepid Pictures. Flanagan's work has attracted the praise of critics for his directing, focused on characters and themes rarely depicted in horror, and a lack of reliance on jump scares. Stephen King, Quentin Tarantino, and William Friedkin, among others, have praised him. So he's best known for his horror films, all of which he directed, wrote, edited, which include Oculus, Hush, Before I Wake, Ouija, Origin of Evil, Gerald's Game, and Dr. Sleep. And then he's also known for the Netflix anthology series The Haunting, which consists of The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor. Flanagan also created and directed the Netflix horror miniseries Midnight Mass, which is absolutely wonderful. If you've not watched Midnight Mass yet and you're a fan of any of the other things that I've listed, please go watch it. It's so amazing. The first episode's a little kind of confusing of where everything's going, but then once you get there, you're hooked. It's so good. I think my mom and I started watching it at 9 o'clock at night by accident. On a Tuesday, and we were it's midnight, we need to go to bed, but we just want to keep watching it. And then he has an upcoming series called The Midnight Club, which I will definitely be watching because I pretty much love everything that he's done. So next we will move on to Ewan McGregor, who plays Danny Torrance and was a Scottish actor. His accolades include a Golden Globe Award, a Primetime Emmy Award, and the BAFTA Britannia Humanitarian Award. In 2013, he was appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire for his services to drama and charity. His first professional role was in 1993 as a leading role in the British Channel 4 series Lipstick on Your Collar. He then achieved international fame for his portrayals of heroin addict Mark Renton in the drama films Trainspotting and T2 Trainspotting. He, of course, is Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Star Wars prequel trilogy, Poet Christian in the musical film Moulin Rouge. He's been in so many things: Black Hawk Down, Big Fish, Robots. He was in Angels and Demons. He played the ghost in Roman Polanski's The Ghost Rider. He was Lumiere in Beauty and the Beast, the live action. He was Christopher Robin in the new Christopher Robin film that came out in 2018. Of course, he was in Dr. Sleep. He played Black Mask in Birds of Prey, which was amazing. He's been in so many things. Was in Fargo. He received Golden Globe nominations for Best Actor, Musical, or Comedy for both Moulin Rouge and Salmon Fishing in the Yemen. He's also done a lot of theater. He's been in Guys and Dolls, Othello, and then he portrayed fashion designer Halston in a Netflix miniseries Halston, for which he won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Limited or Anthology Series or Movie. He reprised his role as Obi-Wan Kenobi in the 2022 Disney Plus miniseries of the same name. McGregor was ranked number 36 on Empire Magazine's The Top 100 Movie Stars of All Time list in 1997. So McGregor's just amazing and so wonderful in Dr. Sleep. I was really excited that he was cast to play him because I thought that he would do a really good job. And then Danny Lloyd, who, as we know, played Danny in The Shining, actually makes a little cameo in this film as a spectator at Bradley Turver's baseball game, which we'll talk about when we get there. But I guess he like Lloyd had retired from acting, which we talked about in the Shining episode. And he hadn't done any acting for 38 years and was actually direct messaged on Twitter by Flanagan and was like, hey, I really would love to have you as a cameo. And he was like, yeah, why not? Like, sure, I'll come back, which I think is really cool. Next, we'll move on to Rebecca Ferguson, who plays Rose the Hat, who is the leader of the True Knot. And Rebecca is a Swedish actress. She began her acting career in the Swedish soap opera Nya Tider and went on to star in the slasher film Drowning Ghosts. She came to international prominence with her portrayal of Elizabeth Woodville in the British television miniseries The White Queen, for which she was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Miniseries or Television Film. Ferguson starred as MI6 agent Faust in the action spy film Mission Impossible Rogue Nation and its sequel Mission Impossible Fallout, both with Tom Cruise. She played Ginny Lynn in the musical film The Greatest Showman and acted in science fiction horror film Life. She's been in Florence Foster Jenkins, the mystery thriller The Girl on the Train, and Men in Black International, and then she also portrayed Lady Jessica in the sci-fi epic Dune in 2021. Then we'll move on to Abra Stone, who's played by Kaylee Curran. She is an American actress, and in addition to playing Abra in Dr. Sleep, Curran is also known for playing Harper in the Disney Channel mystery series Secrets of the Sulphur Springs, and she previously played young Nala in the Broadway production of The Lion King. Then we get another appearance of Dick Halloran in this, and in Dr. Sleep he's played by Carl Lumbly. Carl's an American actor known for his role as Dick Halloran in Dr. Sleep, NYPD Detective Marcus Petrie in Cagney and Lacey, CIA Agent Dixon in Alias. He's also done some voiceover work for Justice League Unlimited, as well as Justice League Doom, and then in the video game Injustice Gods Among Us, and he's also known for his roles in the CW's Arrowverse, and he's been in Supergirl, and then he played Isaiah Bradley in the MCU show The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Then we'll move on to Zahn McClarnon, who plays Crow Daddy, who is kind of Rose's right-hand man, and he's an American actor known for his performance in the Western crime drama series Longmire, the second season of Fargo, and the second season of Westworld. In 2022, he plays the lead role in the AMC series Dark Winds, and he's also featured in the 2021 FX on Hulu series Reservation Dogs, and then he's been in the Marvel Cinematic Universe series Hawkeye, and will appear in Echo in 2023. Next, we'll move on to Emily Lind, who plays Snake by Andy, a young member of the True Knot. So Emily is an American actress. She began her career as a child actress when she was known for her recurring role as young Amanda Clark on the ABC series Revenge, and for her role as Ariel on the CBS medical drama Code Black. Lind has also starred in the Netflix original films The Babysitter Killer Queen as Melanie, and then since 2021, she starred as Audrey Hope in the HBO Max teen drama series Gossip Girl. Then we'll move on to Bruce Greenwood, who plays Dr. John Dalton, who is a part of Dan's AA group and kind of the local doctor in town. So Bruce is a Canadian actor and producer. He's best known for his role as the American President John F. Kennedy in 13 Days, which he won a few awards for. He was also Captain Christopher Pike in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek reboot series. He's been nominated for 3 Canadian Screen Awards, 1 for Best Actor for Elephant Song, and twice for Best Supporting Actor for The Sweet Hereafter and Being Julia. In television, he starred as Gil Garcetti in The People vs. O.J. Simpson American Crime Story. He has appeared in Mad Men, Street Elsewhere, Knots Landing, and John from Cincinnati. He currently stars as Dr. Randolph Bell in the Amy Holden Jones created medical drama The Resident. He's appeared in supporting roles in such films as National Treasure Book of Secrets, Kingsman: The Golden Circle, Hollywood Homicide, Double Jeopardy, Deja Vu, iRobot, Dinner for Schmucks, Capote, The Post, and Super 8. He's also done a lot of voice acting work, which includes Class of the Titans, Bruce Wayne / Batman in Batman Under the Red Hood, Young Justice, Batman Gotham by Gaslight, and Batman Death in the Family. Then we'll move on to Jocelyn Donahue, who plays Lucy Stone, Abra's mother. Jocelyn is an American actress. She played the lead role in Ti West's critically acclaimed horror film The House of the Devil, winning Best Actress in the 2009 LA Scream Fest, a young version of Barbara Hershey's character in Insidious Chapter 2, and then in 2015, Donahue starred in the crime thriller The Frontier, along with Dr. Sleep in 2019. We've got a couple more people to get through. I know it's a bigger cast than normal, but they're all very important characters, so gotta give them all some love. Next, we're gonna move on to Cliff Curtis, who plays Billy Freeman, Dan's friend, co-worker, and AA sponsor. Cliff is a New Zealand actor. His film credits include Once Were Warriors, Three Kings, Below, Training Day, Whale Rider, Sunshine, Live Free or Die Hard, The Dark Horse, for which he won the Asia Pacific Screen Award for Best Performance by an Actor, and then, of course, Dr. Sleep. And then his television roles include NBC's Trauma and ABC's Body of Proof and Missing. From 2015 to 2017, he portrayed Travis Manawa on the AMC series Fear the Walking Dead. Then we have Alex Esseo, who plays Wendy Torrance, Dan's mother. Wendy was played by Shelley Duvall in The Shining, but Alex is a Canadian actress who has appeared predominantly in horror films. She had her first lead role in 2014 in the American horror film Starry Eyes, and then she had a starring role in the 2017 American horror film Midnighters. She's collaborated several times with director Mike Flanagan, playing Wendy Torrance, of course, in Dr. Sleep, and then she had supporting roles in both The Haunting of Bly Manor and Midnight Mass. Then we'll move on to Zachary Mumm, who plays Dave Stone, Abra's father, and Zachary is a British-Nigerian actor known for his role in the 2018 TV series 7 Seconds, and then he was in the film A United Kingdom in 2016. Then we'll move on to Jacob Tremblay, who plays Bradley Trevor, a victim of the True Knot, known to Abra as the baseball boy. So Jacob is a Canadian actor. He is the recipient of various accolades, including Canadian Screen Award, Critics' Choice Movie Award, and Young Artist Award, and nominations for the Screen Actors Guild Award, 2 Saturn Awards, and an Empire Award. He starred as Jack Newsom in Room in 2015, for which he won a Critics' Choice Award, a Canadian Screen Award, and became the youngest nominee for a Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by a Male Actor in a Supporting Role. He subsequently went on to roles as August Pullman, a child with Teacher Collins syndrome in the drama Wonder, which earned him additional Critics' Choice Award nominations, the film Good Boys 2019, Dr. Sleep in 2019, as well as voice roles as Damian Wayne / Robin in Harley Quinn and the title character of the Pixar film Luca. And the last actor we're going to talk about is Henry Thomas, who plays the bartender, an apparition who calls himself Lloyd but resembles Dan's late father, Jack. So Henry is an American actor. He began his career as a child actor and had a lead role in the film E.T. the Extraterrestrial, for which he won a Young Artist Award and received Golden Globe Award, a BAFTA Award, and Saturn Award nominations. Thomas has also had roles in the film Cloak and Dagger, Fire in the Sky, Legends of the Fall, Suicide Kings, All the Pretty Horses, Kings of New York, 1114, Dear John, and he was nominated for a Golden Globe Award for Best Supporting Actor, Series, Miniseries, or Television Film for the role in the television film Indictment, The McMartin Trial. Thomas has more recently collaborated with filmmaker Mike Flanagan, appearing in the films Ouija, Origin of Evil, Gerald's Game, and, of course, Dr. Sleep. And then he also was in The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor, and he had a main role in Flanagan's horror film series Midnight Mass. So Flanagan definitely has his favorites, it seems like. So now that we've met the cast, we can move on to some fun facts, and then of course we'll do a little book-to-movie difference, because this is another Stephen King book-to-movie adaptation, and then we will jump into the scene-by-scene breakdown. This is probably going to be another long episode. It's a 3-hour runtime on the film itself, so, make some popcorn and buckle up for this one. So the first fun fact we have is that Mike Flanagan painstakingly recreated the sets of the Overlook Hotel from blueprints acquired from Stanley Kubrick's estate. Most elements of The Shining were recreated with duplicate sets and look-alike actors, though 3 shots were reused: the aerial shot of the water and the island, and the 2 shots after it of the car driving on the mountain road. The shots were degrained, recolored as day for night, and had snow digitally added. As I said, this is a sequel to The Shining, so Stephen King got the idea for Dr. Sleep in 1998 at a book signing when somebody asked him what happened to Danny Torrance from his novel The Shining. This was a question King had often asked himself, as well as what would have happened to Jack Torrance had he found AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. When people kept repeating the question, King always jokingly replied that Danny eventually married Charlene McGee, the girl from Firestarter. However, King eventually started thinking seriously about how old Danny was and what would happen to Wendy, and he eventually decided to find the answers with a sequel. But it was a very tall order, and I think that he did amazing. This is one of my favorite Stephen King books. Again, I think I like it a little bit better than The Shining, but it's amazing. The book is phenomenal, and the movie is just as great. So then something we'll talk about in the book, when Dan is working at the hospice center, there's a cat there known as Azrael, or Azzy, who kind of seems to know who is next to pass in the hospice place. And so Azzy's actually based on a real cat named Oscar, a tabby cat who resides at Steerhouse Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Rhode Island. Oscar appears able to predict the impending deaths of terminally ill patients. He will sit or sleep by their beds for a few hours before they die. Since the publication of an article featuring Oscar in a New England Medical Journal in 2007, Oscar has been present for over 100 patient deaths. In 2013, Oscar suffered an allergic reaction and died for a few seconds before he was revived by vets. In the film, Azzy is portrayed by Bonkers, a cat that belongs to the Newton brothers, the film's composer, and is a very cute little cat, if I do say so myself. So then up for the role of Danny Torrance was Dan Stevens, Chris Evans, Matt Smith, and Jeremy Renner were all considered and met with the director for the lead role, but McGregor was eventually cast with Stephen King's blessing. Then we have kind of a nice little Easter egg, is that the address of Abra's house is 1980, which was also the release year of The Shining. So then all of the members of the True Knot had a movement coach, who was Terry Notary, who helped create the physical manifestation of cycling and puppeteering their human bodies, which if you watch, like, it definitely has a specific feel to it, and I think it's really cool that they took that extra time and added that in. Like the character he portrays in the film, Ewan McGregor is a recovering alcoholic. This was one of the aspects that probably cinched the role for him, as one of the first things he said to director Mike Flanagan was that he was interested in exploring recovery, which I think is good for him, and I hope that he is feeling good and nice and sober and happy now. So the True Knots campground was filmed at Stone Mountain Park outside of Atlanta due to its diverse woods. The film was effectively fast-tracked after the runaway box office success of It in 2017. When Abra is looking at the missing persons report regarding the baseball boy, it states that he disappeared on September 21st, which is the same day as Stephen King's birthday. According to director Mike Flanagan, the performance of Jacob Tremblay during the first take of his death scene was so intense that it surprised and scared the other actors, including Rebecca Ferguson, who was so horrified she was stammering and couldn't get her lines out. When the scene was over, grinning Tremblay jumped up, covered in fake blood, high-fived his father, and walked over to the craft services table to get a snack, leaving Ferguson and the rest of the cast shell-shocked and traumatized. Reminds me of that story about Jack in It when Skarsgård was doing like an interview and he's like, and I was terrified that I had, scarred this kid for life, and then he just gets up and he's like, that was great, I love what you're doing with the character, and he was totally fine and is just a really professional child actor. And then one of my favorite ones is that McGregor actually performed, so little context, I guess, in the movie, there's a scene where Abra has to act possessed by Dan, and so McGregor actually performed the scene first so that Kaylee could kind of mimic his performance and see how he would do it so that she could get the body language right and everything, which I think is really great. And the scene, it definitely sells. It's great. They did amazing. And then this one I really liked, which I never actually noticed until I saw this as a fun fact when I was doing research for this episode, but the sound of Dan's car driving into the bridge in the woods on his way to the shootout is actually the sound of Danny's trike on the tile in the halls of the Overlook. And then something we'll talk about is that we get another bloody elevator scene, but this one was used just all digital because it had to, the angle had to change to make it from Rose's eye level, which we'll talk about when we get into the scene by scene. So those are kind of the fun facts that I have. Now we can kind of get into book versus movie differences, just because I always find that interesting, and if you have read the book. So first we're going to talk about Dick Hallorann. So in the book, Wendy, Dan's mother, asks the Overlook Hotel's chef, Dick Hallorann, to visit with Dan to help him through the trauma he's experiencing from his stay there. Dan has been seeing ghosts from the hotel, mostly the naked woman from room 217. Hallorann tells Danny about his sadist grandfather and teaches him how to lock the spirits in these boxes within his mind. And then in the movie, Wendy never calls for Hallorann. Instead, he appears as a ghost who young Danny briefly speaks with to learn about the magical boxes that he can store the spirits in his head. So I think just kind of the biggest difference there is that because Kubrick killed Hallorann off, he wasn't able to like come back as a real person. So they had to bring that back so they could still have that kind of plot point of Danny being able to lock these characters away or lock the spirits away, because that is a very big plot point. But with Hallorann being dead, they had to bring him back somehow. So they brought him back as a ghost as opposed to him being real in the book. We also have a couple of missing characters that aren't in the movie. So when Dan arrives in Frasier in the book, he receives a job from Casey Kingsley. Kingsley takes a chance on him, even though he can tell that Danny's an alcoholic. He says he can work in Frasier as long as he sobers up and attends AA. Dr. John is kind of the bridge between Danny and Abra's family in the book, and he convinces Abra's family that the two both have special powers. And then in the movie, Kingsley's role is somewhat combined with Billy's, and Dr. John appears briefly, again kind of as a nod to the book, but it's never revealed whether or not he knows Abra's family. So he's kind of their family doctor in the book, and John plays a much, much bigger role in the book than he does in the movie. So then the True Knot deaths are a little bit different in the book. So in the book, after killing a young boy, many of the True Knot slowly contract measles and start to die because the boy hadn't been immunized yet. And it's kind of silly, but I also think that it could be very valid, because I doubt that those people like go to the doctor. They probably don't, they're technically kind of dead, so they don't need those things, but they also are susceptible to those things. It's really interesting. Others are killed when Danny unleashes a red steam on them that he had breathed in when he meets with Abra's grandmother. This would have been really hard to kind of add in and probably was cut for time. And then some of the other members of the True Knot part ways with the leader Rose when she becomes too obsessed with Abra, and many of them are kind of dying off. So some of them are like, I'm getting out of here before I die anyway. So then in the movie, none of that happens. Nobody ends up leaving Rose's side, and it just kind of becomes an all-out shooting spree between Billy and Danny and the rest of the True Knot, or most of the True Knot, at a campsite. So then another big plot point that was in the book but not in the film is that Dan Torrance is actually Abra's uncle. She jokingly calls him Uncle Dan, but he really is Uncle Dan, like genetically. We find out that Jack Torrance once had an affair with her grandmother before, of course, all of the events during The Shining took place. And then in the novel, I remember reading this part, and it stands out a lot to me, was that as an infant, Abra kind of predicts the September 11th terrorist attacks, which I think is, like, I remember reading that part and being like, oh my god, this is absolutely wild that, you can kind of see early on that she has the shine. So in the novel, as an infant, Abra actually kind of predicts the September 11th terrorist attack. She starts crying at specific times that end up being the numbers of the flights and all of this different stuff. And then once like kind of all the events happen, her parents are kind of like, oh gee, but she's like a couple weeks old or maybe a couple months old. I can't remember exactly, but like she's a baby. And then another book to movie difference is that in the novel, Andy is much older and she and Rose are lovers, which the whole True Knot is kind of this weird kind of polyamorous group. A lot of them sleep with Rose. But yeah, in the movie, they're kind of more mentor-mentee relationship as opposed to romantically involved or physically involved, I guess you could say. So then back to Billy and Dr. John. So along with a complete makeover for Billy Freeman, the group of main characters has been altered with the elimination of Dr. John from the fight against the True Knot. So in the book, Dan, Billy, and Dr. John embark on the fight against Rose and her gang right after finding Bradley Trevor's body, but the movie just kind of uses Dan and Billy alone. Dr. John's part has been so diminished that he really only appears at the very beginning. So then this is kind of a bummer. I think that there's a lot of unneeded character deaths. I could get why it happened, but also I don't think it was necessary. I think that kind of bummed me out the most when I saw the movie, but I also saw this movie 4 times in theaters, so it was not enough to make me not like it. In the movie, Crow Daddy, a member of the cult, visits Abra's home in order to kidnap her, but ends up killing her father. After shooting Rattlesnake Andy, she commands Billy to kill himself, which he does. That's kind of one of her powers, is she can tell people to do things. They call her a pusher, so she tells people to do things and they do them. And in the book, none of this happens. While the members of the True Knot die, Abra's father and Billy make it to the end of King's Book alive. And then kind of the big one is our beloved Danny. So in the movie, Danny sacrifices himself to save Abra by tampering with the Overlook Hotel's boiler and burning it to the ground. He's later seen in Abra's house giving her advice about her powers, but it's revealed he's not really there. He's a ghost, much like when Dick Halloran would come and visit him. But in the book, Danny Torrance doesn't die. He's seen celebrating 15 years of sobriety with his new family at a birthday party for Abra. And this was kind of the most surprising change. I remember when I read the book, and we'll talk more about the death flies, but when someone's going to die, what he sees is all of these flies covering their faces. And so he's talked about that. He talks about that in kind of the beginning of the book when he's talking about his mother passing. And then at one point in the book, they stop at like a rest area, I think, or something, and he sees flies all over his face that aren't there. And I remember getting so frustrated. And I like put the book down because I was like, I swear to God, Stephen, I swear, like, this book is so amazing, and if you kill him, I'm gonna be so frustrated. Like, I like stopped reading it for a bit, because not a lot, probably like 20 minutes, but I was like, no, like, I don't want to do this right now. I don't want that to happen. And then he ends up, saving the day, and they're okay, and that's fine, and so that's what I expected going into the movie, and then he does die, and I was like, wait, no, what the heck? Like, yeah, it broke my heart. I definitely cried when I saw this in theaters. I think every time, because it just bummed me out so bad. But yeah, kind of like I mentioned, so the whole ending changes. And so yeah, that's kind of our last book to movie difference, is that the whole ending kind of changes with what Dan ends up doing and how Dan ends up finalizing what happens with the rest of his life. And yeah, I was just super bummed it had to end that way, but I just think of the Dan that was in the book, and yeah, that's the Dan I choose to think of when I think of Dan Torrance. So now that we've met the cast, we've got a summary, and we know some of the book to movie differences, we can get into a scene-by-scene breakdown. We open with a trailer campground, and we see a little girl get out of an RV. She tells her mom that she's going to go pick some flowers, and we see that it is 1980 in Florida. She goes down by the river to pick flowers, and she hears a woman singing. She walks up to her. This woman is sitting on a tree stump by the river, and she's holding all of these beautiful flowers, like way prettier than the flowers that the little girl has found. We learn that the little girl's name is Violet, and she asks this woman where she found the flowers. And the woman, she's wearing this hat, like a magician's hat, and the woman introduces herself and says that her name is Rose the Hat. She then tells the little girl that her hat is magic and shows Violet a little magic trick. At this point, we see a man appear at the tree line, and Rose says, "Oh, don't worry about that, that's just my friend." Rose shows Violet a magic trick, and we learn that Violet also has the shine. So Rose basically pulls a flower petal out of her hat, or like says that she has a flower petal in her hand, but the hat is kind of hiding it, and she asks Violet what color it is, and Violet's able to tell her that it's purple. And that's how we learned that Violet also has the shine. We see more people start to appear at the tree line, and Rose picks a flower out of her hat and eats it. And Violet gets a little worried. She's like, oh my gosh, no, like, you don't eat flowers. And Rose goes, oh no, honey, that's exactly what you do. And it's the special ones that taste best. Now the people in the tree line start advancing toward Rose and Violet. Rose grabs a hold of Violet's wrist, and the others attack her. We also see Rose's eyes glowing this kind of white silver color. And the next thing we see is Violet's mom looking for her and all of these RVs driving off behind her. We see the Overlook Hotel and then the iconic carpet. It says Chapter 1, Old Ghosts. We see Danny riding his trike through the Overlook like we saw in The Shining. He stops by room 237 and the doorknob slowly twists and the door creaks open. Danny looks afraid, and then he's awake from a nightmare. He's in a little bedroom that seems to be his, and he gets up to use the bathroom. However, on his way there, he hears a noise coming from inside the bathroom. As he opens the door, we see the woman from the Overlook, the woman who lives in the tub. We hear his heart beating louder, and the woman starts to get out of the tub. He closes the door and just stands in the hallway, scared. He sees the knob turn, and he closes his eyes and ends up wetting his pants. Wendy finds him moments later in the hallway and helps him get all cleaned up. He's sucking his thumb and won't tell her what's going on. Apparently he hasn't talked since they left the hotel. Wendy goes into the bathroom and no one is there. However, she sees wet footprints on the rug just outside of the bath. Now it's daytime and we're sitting outside with Danny. He's on a bench by some water. It appears to be kind of this like park area. And while he's sitting there, Dick Hallorann shows up to talk with Danny. Dick talks in his head again, and then Danny out loud says, "My daddy tried to kill me." And Dick explains that that wasn't all Jack. The Overlook fed on Jack's dark like it fed on Danny's light, and that everyone has both. Danny says, "It's not done with me." Dick explains that, his grandmother, which we learned in The Shining, also shined. And when Dick's grandfather died, who was very abusive to both him and his grandmother, Dick was very excited. But then his grandfather started kind of haunting him, much like the spirits from the Overlook are haunting Danny now. And Dick's grandmother taught him how to lock his grandfather away in a box so he couldn't bother him anymore, and he teaches that trick to Danny. Dick says the others will reach out for him too, but now he can lock them away. Dick explains that Danny has too much shine. Danny gets a little upset with him, and he's like, "Pictures in a book. You told me they were pictures in a book and they couldn't hurt me." And Dick's like, "Well, you kind of just had too much shine that you brought those ghosts to life. The world is a hungry place and it eats what shines, like mosquitoes or leeches." Dan will later give almost that same advice later in the film to Abra. So he gives Danny that box and tells him to memorize it so he can build one in his mind, and when that bitch comes around, you'll be ready. Dick then gets up and we hear Wendy calling for Danny. He has wandered off and she's very panicked. Dick is also gone. We also see the missing poster for Violet hung up on a bulletin board. Dan and Wendy are back home watching TV, and Wendy's clearly worried about her son. He looks toward the bathroom and heads that way. We hear his heart beating again. The bathtub woman is there. He walks toward her and shuts the door with him inside the room with her. He puts her in a box and locks her away, and he comes back out and snuggles up with Wendy. Next we see Danny when he's older. He wakes up and has memories from the night before. He's drunk at a bar and he meets a girl. It's New Jersey, 2011. They hit it off and then he starts a fight at the bar. As he's beating up this guy, he tells him to take his medicine, same kind of verbiage that his father used with him when he was younger. They go back to her place and do cocaine and have sex. He wakes up the next morning and all of his money is gone. The woman is passed out in her own vomit and her young toddler is walking around the apartment. We see Dick show up and he tells Danny that he doesn't need to steal from her, as Danny had kind of gone through her purse and was going to take some money out of her wallet. Dan does it anyway. He says she used my money to buy the coke. He grabs the toddler and puts him on the bed next to her, and then he tries to lock them away, but Dick tells him that's not how it works. Memories are the real ghosts that we have to take with us. We don't just get to lock them away. Next, we're in New Hampshire, and these parents are watching their daughter play the piano. It's the day before her birthday. They tuck her into bed. She has this beautiful room full of all these different fairy lights, and then we hear piano music coming from downstairs. The parents wake up and they get up to go put her back in bed, but no one is at the piano. She's playing it with her mind in her dreams. She also shines. Now in New York, we're at the cinema and this young blonde woman meets a man at a movie theater. Her name is Andy and she's on a quote-unquote date with this man. He wants to leave, but she wants to watch the movie. We see Rose the Hat and Crow in the back watching them. Andy also shines and, like I mentioned before, is a pusher. She can make people do what she wants. She tells the man to sleep and steals from him. She cuts his face and tells him that whenever he sees the scar on his face, he will say, "I love little girls," out loud. He won't be able to explain the scars away, and the next time he goes looking for a little girl online, he'll remember the time he was bit by a snake. She kisses his cheek and then leaves. Rose and Crow meet her in the parking lot. She's able to push Crow by saying, "You want to leave me alone," but Rose grabs a hold of her and she's not strong enough to do that to Rose. Next we see Dan sleeping under a bridge and he's looking pretty awful. His bottle is empty and it appears to be morning. He decides to get on a bus to Fraser, New Hampshire. We see Abra, the little girl. Her birthday is well underway. There's a magician at a party and he's doing all these tricks. And Abra's like, "Well, I can do those tricks too. Like, I can do that too." And the magician's like, "Yeah, that's nice, sweetheart." Like, kind of just dismissing her. You know, he's like, "I'm doing my thing. Like, just shut up and watch," kind of a deal. Now the party's over and her parents are cleaning up. They just, you know, they're kind of chatting with themselves about, "Oh, just a few more hours and it'll be bedtime. We just have to get through a few more hours." And when they come inside, all of the spoons are on the ceiling. Of course, we already know that Abra shines too, but she shines very strong. And she's very proud of herself. She's maybe like 4 or 5, maybe 6, but I'd say like 5. She's so proud of herself, but the way her parents look at her, she gets really sad and all of the spoons drop off the ceiling. Dan feels that energy, as does Rose the Hat, but they're unsure of what it is. Chapter 2, Empty Devils. So Rose goes to check on Andy, who's asleep in the RV after they drugged her. Rose then tells Andy all about the knot and offers her a chance at a long life. She'll be known as Snakebite Andy. We learn that Andy is 15 and kind of the motto in the knot is "Eat well, stay young, live long. What's tied can never be untied." Rose is almost offering Andy the chance at an almost immortal life. Meanwhile, Dan is getting off the bus, and we hear that really loud heart-beating noise again. He's walking through the town of Fraser, and he meets a man named Billy at a park where they have this teeny town and this little train. So basically, teeny town is a giant model, or not a giant model, but, you know, a kid-sized model of the downtown area of Fraser. Billy asks Dan some questions, and Dan mentions that he's running away from himself, and Billy says that he knows that look, and Billy ends up getting Dan a room and even pays 2 weeks up front for Dan so that he can kind of get this room in this room and board area that Billy also lives in. The woman tells Dan to behave and don't be late on payments, and he kind of gets all set up. Billy, like I said, lives in the same building, and him and Billy decide that tomorrow Billy's going to try and help him get a job. And Billy again mentions that he knows the look and he tries to help people that he has good feelings about, and he has a good feeling about Dan. Now we're back with Andy and the knot and Rose. Andy is on the beach and Rose and the knot start her transformation. Andy lies down on Rose's lap in front of this fire, and the others start chanting, and Andy will be tying her life to theirs. She agrees to this, she eats the rest of Violet's steam, and her transformation begins. It looks very painful, and Andy's body basically has to die for her to become like them. 2 other members hold her down while she screams in pain, and we see her eyes glow that silver-white color, and then we're back with Dan. He wakes up and the woman that he left in bed in New Jersey is next to him. She's dead and the baby ended up dying too. She tells him that they still haven't found us yet. Dan ends up falling out of bed and he sees a bottle in his bag. He ends up going to Billy's room in the middle of the night and wakes him up, and Dan wants to know how he knew the look. Billy's like, "You're sick and tired." And Dan says that he needs help, and Billy tells him to come in and they can talk. Next we're at AA with Billy and Dan. Dan gets his newcomer's chip and we meet Dr. John, and they talk at the end of the meeting. Dan helps Dr. John find his missing watch using his shine, because as he's getting more sober, more of his shine is coming back. And later, him and Dr. John are talking in John's office, and John wants to know how he knew where the watch was. And it's really interesting because Dr. John's office is set up exactly like Mr. Ullman's office in The Shining. If you've seen that, you'll know what I'm talking about. And if you, go to YouTube or you watch the movies kind of back-to-back, you'll see it's very set-for-set design of those two sets. Yeah. Dr. John gives Dan a job as an orderly at a hospice center in town, and John asks Dan if he's religious or if he believes in a higher power, and Dan says, "Our beliefs don't make us better, our actions make us better." And then he mentions that the whole world is kind of a hospice with fresh air. Everyone's dying. We're all just at different stages. Dan starts working the night shift, and this is where he turns into the character known as Dr. Sleep. Andy is waking up on the beach, and it's now daytime. Rose checks in on her and tells her that she was asleep for a few days, but she's welcomed in by everyone. Now we're with Abra as her mom is tucking her into bed, but she thinks that her mom is scared of her, but her mom tells her that they love her more than anything as she tucks her into bed. Dan is at the hospice center, and we meet Azrael, the beautiful white cat. Azrael shines a bit too and knows who's going to die next. She goes into this man's room, and he thinks Dan is the doctor, and the man knows that because as he's in there, he's going to be next. It's his time. The man is scared that it won't be anything at all after it happens, and Dan walks him through it and makes him feel more comfortable, just like going to sleep. And this is where he gets coined as Dr. Sleep. The man sees his wife, and Dan sits with him until he passes. When Dan gets home, "Hello" is written on the blackboard in his room, and it's from Abra. Dan writes back hi, and we see Abra smile in her bed. At this point, she's, still really young. She's still, kind of that, 5 or 6 year old age. Chapter 3, Little Spy. It's 8 years later, and Dan gets his 8-year sober chip in AA. He looks a lot better, and he talks about his dad. He said that once he saw his dad's 5-month chip and talks about how his dad broke his arm. He mentions that his dad died when he was 5, so the only way he got to know him was when he drank. The drinking and the temper and the anger was all Jack's. It was all that Dan could know of him, and that he got sober for Jack Torrance. Now we see Dan in a room with another patient. The cat is on the bed, and the man's a bit shocked. But Dan again talks him through death. They talk about his life and memories. Dan shows him his 2 sons when they were young. And this man says, "I'm not scared of hell, Doc. I'm scared there will be nothing at all." And Dan says, "We don't end, Charlie. I don't know much, but I know that we don't end." Charlie has memories from his childhood about blueberries his mother used to grow. Charlie slowly goes, and when Dan comes back home, he has a new note from Abra. It's been a while since they've communicated. It says morning, and he writes back, school. We see Crow driving up to the campsite, and he talks with Rose on her watchtower. They call it her watchtower. It's basically just an area on the roof of the RV that she goes and sits on. Crow says that Grandpa Flick is looking rough, and they talk about their next target. Crow thinks that he's somewhere in Iowa, but he wants to open another canister to tide everyone over. Rose says that it's only been 6 months since they last took steam, and 6 months is essentially nothing in their world. She tries to distract him with kisses, and he's not having any of it. They go back and forth about if there's less steam in the world and all of that kind of stuff, and he says that there's less steam, and she's saying no, there's not. But she ends up pulling out a canister for everyone, but now they only have 2 left after they use this one this evening. The others drink from it, but not Rose. They end up finding the kid in Iowa, who will be known as the baseball boy, aka Bradley Trevor. They go to his baseball game, and this is when we get the Danny Lloyd cameo. He's a patron at the baseball game, or spectator at the game, talking about how great Bradley Trevor is at baseball. He always knows where the ball is going to be. He hits it every time. It's like he can read the pitcher's mind. They pull up next to Bradley Trevor after the game as he's walking home, and Andy convinces him to get in the van, and they take him away. This kid is a great actor. They take him to this abandoned power plant thing and torture him to get all of the steam out of him, essentially killing him over a long period of time so they can take all of the steam from him. It's a very intense and heartbreaking scene, and Rose is, it sounds weird, but probably one of my favorite Stephen King villains that I've come across in my reading of his. She's just so evil, but she's human to a point, but she's not. She's absolutely horrendous, but that's what makes it all the more amazing. And I think that Rebecca Ferguson, who plays Rose, did an amazing job with her. There's a lot of interviews about kind of the process that Rebecca went in to get into that mindset, and kind of different character pieces in her costume, jewelry, or things in her hair that she had specific stories for, about like, oh yeah, this is a ring that I would use to like torture the children for, or this thing in my hair was from a kid that I took. Or it was really interesting how she had all this whole backstory for Rose that we never really get, but I think it was really cool. So when they get to this abandoned area, Bradley Trevor, asks them, are you gonna hurt me? And Rose says, yes. Pain and fear purify steam. You understand, right? His screams are haunting, and while they do this, they drink from him, and it's so fucking creepy and sad. It's like they're just these like massive parasites murdering this child who's probably 8 or 9 years old, maybe 10, but like not as old as Abra. It's just terrible. Abra is asleep, but taps into what's happening, probably because Bradley is kind of screaming out for help, and with his shine, it goes to other kids who also shine, because Abra's shine is so strong, she kind of she's on the receiving end of his calls. Abra taps into what's happening, and she starts screaming in bed. She puts herself there and watches what they're doing, and she's asking them to stop from kind of her projection of herself in this abandoned power plant area. Rose notices her, but keeps stabbing Bradley because they're, in the middle of their ritual or whatever. Abra's parents run in because she's screaming bloody murder, and they think that she's having a nightmare, and she even shakes Dan out of bed and cracks the wall in his room with one word: murder. But because Dan falls out of bed, he sees it first in the mirror when he puts his hand on the dresser to help him kind of pick himself up off the floor, and the cracks in the wall in his room show the word red rum, which of course we know from The Shining is murder backwards. He goes up, he writes who on the blackboard, and she writes back, baseball boy. Now the baseball boy has died, and they need to start cleaning up. They drain him of the rest of the steam to put in a canister for later. Abra is crying, talking to her parents, telling her that they killed him. Rose and Crow are burying the body, and she tells him about the looker, about Abra. They want to find her next. They think that she's on the East Coast, and Crow's like, bullshit, someone from the East Coast was able to look in. And she's like, no, like, I'm 99% sure that's exactly what happened. The next day, Dan goes into work and writes a message to Abra. He writes, I hope you're okay. Your friend Dan. Abra goes downstairs the next day and talks with her mom. She tells her mom about her new friend, and her mom asks about last night. Abra says nothing like that's going to happen anymore. She doesn't need to worry. She's done with all of that. At school, Abra reads other kids' mind, and people refer to her as the freak. She looks up the baseball boy and finds him on a website for missing children. This is when she learns that his name is Bradley Trevor. After school, she gets home and talks with her father. He's in the middle of writing a book, and she goes off to do homework. She's able to find where he's buried using his picture, and we hear that really loud heart beating again. She goes to the window and projects herself again and finds Rose doing some shopping. She's now kind of in Rose's head. Rose catches this rather quickly and goes to kind of the freezer section of the grocery store and looks at her reflection, and she sees Abra. She then tries to get in Abra's head, but Abra quickly pushes her out so fast that Rose is physically blown back in the store. The doors break in this freezer section, and Rose is pushed back through the aisle. Rose's nose is bleeding, and Dan passes out at AA during all of this happening. He was crying out, "Help me, Tony," and his nose is also bleeding once Billy picks him up off the floor and they get him to come to. Rose gets back and tells Crow what happened. He's asking if this girl is going to be food or if we turn her. And Rose is adamant about, we don't turn her. She's too powerful. We don't need someone like that in the knot. That's too much for us to handle. But Rose thinks that they could keep her for a little while and torture her for years to get steam out of her. Rose says that she's the great white whale and she wants her. The next day, when Abra gets out of the car at school, she leaves and goes to find Dan instead. She takes the bus to Fraser and finds him working at Teeny Town. Dan takes a 5-minute break and they go walk over to a bench to talk. She wants to talk in his head, but he wants to talk normal. Dan is worried. She says it's fine that he'll be known as Uncle Dan, and it's okay because he's magic and she's magic, so they kind of are related in ways. He says that he never really thought of it as magic. He always called it The Shining, but for a long time he thought that it was just kind of his imaginary friend Tony who was actually the magic one. And Abra says that she thought that Dan was her imaginary friend for a while. She tells him that her parents know, but that they're scared of her. Dan mentions that he's met a lot of people in his life who shine a little bit, but they don't even realize it. You know, they might do really well on a test that they didn't study for, or bring flowers home for their wife when their wife had a really bad day. But most of the time, people who do have the shine don't know that they do. Abra tells Dan that the baseball boy shined, Bradley Trevor. They took him and they ate his shine. She wants to find them and stop them, and she wants Dan's help. She's like, you can go to Iowa, and if you can get his baseball glove, I can tell you where they are. And Dan's like, whoa, 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 absolutely not. We're not doing that. He shuts it down, and he tells Abra to go home. He's like, don't shine. Find anything, or almost anything, to stop your shine. Things like this don't die. They come back, and they always do, and that you don't want those people knowing that you're onto them. We flash back to Danny and Wendy, and she's thinking about Jack, and Danny realizes it. Danny goes into the bathroom and changes his eye color from brown to blue so she won't think of Jack when she looks at him anymore. Now back in the present, Azzy goes into an empty room, and when Danny goes in, Dick is inside. Danny almost locks them away. They talk about Abra, and Dick tells him he has a debt to pay and he needs to help that little girl. He says Ka is a wheel, Doc. So, in the Stephen King universe, Ka, from what I've heard from the Dark Tower series, which I'm just now starting, I haven't got to yet, but Ka is the will of Gan, roughly synonymous with destiny or fate. So Ka, in a lot of different of Stephen King's works, has been described as a wheel whose only purpose is to turn. So Ka is kind of considered to be a guide or a destination, not really a strict plan, but Ka is a wheel, and there's actually a really great quote from Dr. Sleep from the end that I love, that I really want to get tattooed on me. Yeah, so I really like this quote from the book, and I think it's at the epilogue or like the last chapter. I can't remember when it comes in, but the quote is, "Life was a wheel. Its only job was to turn, and it always came back to where it started." Because I feel like in my life specifically, I've had a lot of very interesting incidences where I felt like I've been certain places before, whether that's physically or mentally, and then things all seem to kind of come back around, and I'm either in that place again or I'm in that mood again, and it feels very deja vu like, but different at the same time. It's really difficult to explain. I guess an easy one is I grew up. My dad was in the military, and I spent a lot of time at the armory growing up, going to work with him. That's where we tailgated for football, and I spent a lot of time growing up there. I feel like a good portion of my childhood was in this one area of town, on this one lot. And I never noticed these other buildings or never really paid attention to what they were. And then years later, after graduating college and getting my master's degree, I got a job at one of those buildings. And it was really interesting because I was like, I've been here so many times and I've never noticed that. And so going and driving to work and driving past the armory every day that had been abandoned because they built a different armory in a different part of town, and so that one wasn't needed anymore. And so it was really interesting to be driving past it every day and seeing it every single day and having those memories of childhood all the time. And they actually tore it down on one of my last shifts that I worked at that job. And so it was weird how everything kind of lined up, and it felt very circular. And it was like as I was exiting that job and exiting a very large chapter of my life at a job that I really, really loved, that was also closing as well. And it was very interesting. And I kept thinking back to that Stephen King quote specifically of Ka is a wheel, or life is a wheel, and its only purpose is to turn. So that is my run-in with Ka, I guess you could say. And so Dick further explains that if they would have found you, you would have been long dead. They're like a cancer on the skin of the earth. They eat screams and drink pain, and they know about that little girl, and you can't let them find her. Next we see Rose searching for Abra in her mind. Crow brings her a news article about an earthquake in New Hampshire, and we kind of realize that that's where Abra was when she pushed Rose out of her head. It kind of shook the street. People thought it was an earthquake, but the earthquake center says there were no earthquakes in New Hampshire at that time. She's really excited to have a place to focus, and Crow's really worried about her. He's like, you know, if she's as powerful as you say, I just want you to be careful. Like, he really does care for her. And Rose is like, I'm just gonna get in her brain a little bit, have a little dig around, plant some seeds, tell her, you know, all about her friends and the True Knot, so that when we show up, she's just gonna jump into the van because we're gonna be old friends. We see Abra in bed listening to music. She didn't end up going to dinner, and her mom goes upstairs to check on her, and she just tells her mom that she had a rough day. Her mom explains that she's going to go visit her grandmother, who's sick with cancer, and Rose goes up to her watchtower to find Abra using the type of astral projection that I've talked about. She finds Abra rather easily, but Abra has set a trap for her. She grabs Rose's hand in one of her filing cabinets. So when Rose gets in, we basically learn that everyone's mind is kind of like filing cabinets or boxes of some sort, that everything is filed in, if that makes sense. So, you know, like specific childhood memories or like family things or, you know, friends' birthdays, whatever you want to call it, they're all filed in different spots. So Rose wants to go in and have a look around inside Abra's head, but when she puts her hand in one of the filing cabinets, it closes on her and her hand is stuck. And this allows Abra to get inside of Rose's head and looks around. Rose has to pull her hand out and almost degloves her hand. It's pretty gnarly looking, and when Rose tries to turn around on Abra, Abra kicks her back to her tower, and Rose falls, like literally is pushed off of the tower and onto the ground. Her hand, like I mentioned, is almost degloved, and while Crow Daddy and Andy are checking on her, Barry comes to tell them that Grandpa Flick is cycling. And so basically what that means is that Grandpa Flick hasn't been eating well, like they talk about, and he is dying, and there's nothing they can do. Once the cycle begins, there's no way to stop it. And so the cycling is really interesting because it's like you can kind of see the skin on them slowly disappear, and so like 1 second they'll look like a person, and then the next second they'll look like a skeleton, and then 1 second they'll look like a person. And so basically it's their body catching up to how old they actually should be, and then they turn to dust. And it's supposedly very painful, as the book states. Abra tells Dan what happened. She's like rambling in his head. She's like, I hurt her, and I got in her head, and I hurt her, and she deserved it, and it was great. And he's very worried for her. He's like, oh my God, Abra, what did you do? Like, what happened? We see Grandpa Flick cycling in and out. He turns to Rose, and he says that he's afraid, and she talks with him and basically tells him all the amazing things that he did with his life, and he's been around for ages. I guess he was around for the gladiators in Rome, and he feasted on princes and popes, and people were scared of him, and people built statues of him, and they shook in their villages and skyscrapers. And so Grandpa Flick has seen the world and has been around for a while. But he cycles in and out for a bit, and then he turns to bone and flesh. And Rose sits with him while he goes to make sure that he's not afraid, much like Dr. Sleep. And when he officially does go and turns to steam, the knot gets very, like, they go in so fast to get what little steam of his there is, like vultures. Rose doesn't. She just kind of gets up and walks away, but everyone else is like, it's pretty creepy. So Dan wakes Billy up at 4 a.m. and tells him what's going on and asks for his help, and they start to drive to Iowa. Abra appears in the back of the car using the astral projection and chats with Dan while he drives and Billy sleeps. Abra goes into Dan's head and sees all of the boxes that he has the spirits from the Overlook locked up in, and she asks what's in them, and he explains the hotel a little bit, kind of like the knot. They tried to feed on his shine. He tells her not to mess with the boxes, and while this is happening, the knot are on their way to New Hampshire to get the girl. Crow convinces Rose to stay behind for everyone's safety because Abra can track Rose based on them being in each other's heads. We learn that Crow has connections to the NSA, and they've given him drugs that will knock Abra out, so she won't be able to use any of her shine. Dan and Billy get to the place where Bradley Trevor is buried. They dig him up, and Billy tells Dan the story about how he used to hunt regularly, and one time when he was out hunting, he clipped a buck and followed the buck for a while because he was like, I knew it wouldn't be able to survive that long after I hit it, so I followed it for a bit. I ended up losing track of it, and couple days later, when I was still hunting, I came upon the buck. It smelled terrible. It had died. curled up next to a tree, and he said that digging up Trevor's body smelled exactly like that. And he's never hunted a day since. Chapter 5. Parlor Tricks. They bring back the glove, and as they're driving back, Dan tells Abra that she needs to show her parents. They also stop, Dan and Billy, and get Billy's old deer rifles. When they arrive at Abra's house, her dad comes storming out, very angry, very valid. And Dan's like, "Did you show him?" And she's like, "Well, I told him." And he goes, "Well, that's not the same thing." She ends up showing her father, and then he starts listening to what they have to say. After that, he gets a drink, offers one to Dan and Billy. Of course, they both say no. She shows her father more, and he agrees to let her help. She basically has to show her father what the knot did to the baseball boy for him to agree to let her help. They all go into her room and end up making a plan for what they're going to do next. Abra, Billy, and Dan set off, and she is going to do a magic trick. They get to this campground, and they're waiting for the knot, and Rose is watching everyone from her watchtower. Once the knot arrives, Andy drugs Abra, but Abra was just projecting. They stuck the needle into her teddy bear. Billy and Dan start shooting and kill most of the knot members at the campground. Rose is screaming in pain as she watches her friends die, and I'm sure she gets to feel part of it as well. Andy's the last one, and Dan goes to kill her, but his gun is empty. She tells him to stop and tries to make him sleep. She almost kills Dan, and then Billy shoots Andy. Not enough to kill her right away, and as Billy's approaching her to finish her off, she makes Billy kill himself. Then Andy starts cycling, and she dies. Dan wasn't able to save him, sadly. Abra then projects back to the campsite and tells Dan that the crow isn't there, and then she vanishes. The crow ended up going to her house and drugged her. Her father tries to fight him off, but sadly loses not only his daughter, but his life. Crow takes Abra and leaves. As they leave, we see her father on the floor with a knife stuck in him. Abra wakes up in the backseat of a car, still groggy from the drugs. Crow tells her she can't use her steam right now. She asks about her dad, and he says that a lot of good people were killed today. There's no justice, and we got our way in the end, so no one really needed to die. The outcome didn't change. It's all just a waste, and he blames her for everything. And it's like, sir, you were a child murderer. Like, where do you get off accusing her of doing bad shit? Like, fuck off. Dan finds Abra's father dead, and he takes a bottle of alcohol back to his place. He's trying to connect with Abra, but he can't get through, and he's really worried. He asks Tony for help, and he goes to take a drink. He cries and breaks the bottle without drinking anything. He really tries hard to listen for her in his mind, and he's barely able to find her. He's able to project himself in the car with her and takes over her body for a minute. He talks with the crow. Dan realizes that they're going past Crownville, New York. And then they're like having this really great conversation, and Dan's like, "Oh, I guess it makes sense if you think you're going to live forever." And Crow's like, "I don't understand what you're talking about." He's like, that you wouldn't wear a seatbelt, and Crow doesn't have a seatbelt on. So Dan projects himself into Crow's head, takes control of his body, and slams the car into a tree. Crow shoots out the windshield, cycles, and dies. And of course, Abra's safe because she's like double buckled in the back seat. Rose freaks out, screaming, crying, of course, because Crow was probably one of the last ones in their main group. Even though I think there's more members of the knot spread throughout the world, but in their specific group. Abra gets out of the car and watches the crow cycle and die. She tells him she hopes that it hurts. Rose ends up confronting Abra in the street via astral projection, but Abra just walks right through and pretends she's not even there. Rose is pissed, and she takes all of the steam that's left so that she can get really strong and she can heal so that she can go kill Abra. Dan goes to find her and picks her up, and they head for Colorado, to the Overlook. Dan explains that it's dangerous for people like Rose, too. Abra's mom calls, and she's crying, and Abra just says, "I love you." She hangs up the phone, and she throws it out the window. And that poor woman, like her mom, I can't even imagine. As they get closer to Colorado, it starts snowing. Chapter 6. What Was Once Forgotten. Once they arrive, Dan goes inside to wake it up, the hotel. He tells Abra to wait for Rose to show up, and he will get her when Rose arrives. He will get Abra when Rose arrives. Dan goes inside. The hotel is still full of furniture, but it's rotting a little bit. The lights turn on, and Dan goes to the boiler room to turn everything else on. Next, he goes upstairs to the room they used to live in, him and Jack and Wendy. There's still a hole in the door that Jack had put there. Danny has flashbacks of that night, his father chasing him throughout the hotel. He goes to the gold ballroom and talks with Jack, who is now the bartender. Dan talks about Wendy and Jack, but Jack insists that his name is Lloyd, and Danny must have him confused with someone else. Jack/Lloyd tries to get Danny to drink, but he doesn't. Jack gets upset and kind of shoves the glass off the bar and makes a mess, and so then he takes Dan into the bathroom to clean him up, which is what happens to Jack in The Shining when the waiter in The Shining spills the drinks on Jack and then takes him to the bathroom to help him clean up. So Jack, Dan's father, takes him into the bathroom and tells him that he doesn't need to keep that girl safe and that's not his responsibility. He tells Dan that he can do nothing and just let things unfold as they will. You need to accept the things you cannot change. And as they're talking in the bathroom, Abra calls Dan through their mind and tells him that Rose is here. He goes out to get her, and they go inside together. And as they enter the hotel, Dan sees an axe in, kind of one of those fire boxes or whatever, where you break the glass, get the axe out. That's where he sees it, and he takes it with him. Rose comes into the hotel and sees the bloody elevator scene, and she seems excited by the power this place holds. She gets to the Colorado room and sees Dan and Abra on the stairs. Dan tells Abra to run when it starts. Rose wants to know who Dan is, and she asks if he's the one who killed her crow. On Dan's count, they both get Rose in Dan's mind, in the maze. Rose is walking through the hedge maze, following footprints. Abra's. She thinks it's Abra's mind, but it's actually Dan's. She walks down a path and comes in front of Abra. She tells her that she's going to die here. Abra ends up cutting Rose behind the leg. Rose is explaining to her that they're very similar. Abra cuts her again, and then she's gone. Abra tells Rose that pain and fear purify steam, so you understand, and then she's gone. Rose focuses and ends up grabbing Abra by the throat and holds her up in the air. We see a box sliding towards Rose, very slowly. At the last second, Rose realizes that this isn't Abra's mind, and Rose is able to get out just in time. Back in the Colorado room, Rose takes off her jacket and wants to know why they haven't met yet, they being her and Dan. She says his steam is polluted and dirty. Dan has the axe, and they're now on the staircase in the Colorado room. She offers Dan a chance to join the knot. Eat well, live long. The whole spiel, the whole sales pitch. Dan ends up getting her with the shoulder and the axe, and she takes the axe and gets him in the leg, throwing him down the stairs. At this point, Abra has run off. Rose says that he's going to bleed to death and then starts choking him and drinking his steam. She says that it's really good, that he tastes like whiskey. She sees what happened to him in the hotel, all the pain and fear at the Overlook. Then she finds the boxes in his mind, and he opens them. The ghosts come out and devour Rose, stealing her steam. Rose dies, and all that is left is her hat. The ghosts then go after Danny next, and he can't lock them all up fast enough. Abra's walking through the hotel and comes across the Grady sisters. Then Dan comes around the corner, but he's not Uncle Dan anymore. He's part ghost, monster. He chases Abra with the axe much like his father did to him. She runs into 2 more ghosts and then hides in room 237. Dan is looking for her and finds her in that room. The woman in the tub starts to come for her, but Dan kicks the door down. Dan tells her that she's been bad, and Abra tells him that he's wearing a mask, a false face. Abra tells bad Dan that Dan went to the boiler room when he first got here. He tries to cut her, but real Dan comes back to his senses, and he tells Abra that she should have ran. She says that she doesn't want to leave him. He says that she needs to run, and he needs to close the door. Abra runs off, and Dan goes to the boiler room. We see the boiler start to overheat, and Dan fights with himself to turn it off. The ghost/monster part of him, the part that's been consumed by the Overlook, wants him to turn it off. But he knows it's best to just let everything burn. Abra makes it out, and Dan, back as himself, steps back and kneels at the boiler as it thrashes and catches on fire. Dan watches the room fill with flames, and then he sees his mother in front of him, and he's a child again. From outside, Abra is watching the hotel burn and waiting for Dan to come outside. She hears fire trucks, and then we hear her speak. The fire burned fast, killing the hotel, purifying it. I could almost hear it screaming, hear it dying. I knew you were okay. Now we see Abra in her bedroom talking with Dan. He apologizes and says it was the only way, and she nods. She knows. Abra wants to know if there are more. At this point, Dan gives her the same line that Dick Hallorann told him. The world is a hungry place, and it eats what shines. And maybe there's more of them, or things like them, or worse. But there's more people like you, too. People who stand. Dan then says that when he first met her, he told her she should hide, but he's changing her mind now. That she should keep her shine, and she should shine on. She smiles, and Dan is gone. Her mother soon knocks at the door and tells her that dinner was ready. She tells her mom she was talking to Dan, and that we go on after, and that her dad is okay. Her mom just smiles and nods, holding back tears. Abra hears a noise from the bathroom, and before going downstairs, goes to take care of the woman in the bathtub, just like Dan taught her to. And that is the end of Dr. Sleep. I love this movie so much. I love the book so much. Again, like I said, the ending of the book and movie are very different, but I love them both. Mike Flanagan's amazing. Ewan McGregor did phenomenal. Kaylee is a wonderful Abra. I thought she did so great. And yeah, if you've not read the book and you are tempted or have been thinking about it, I would definitely recommend it. Both are great. I definitely have a little bit more of a like to Dr. Sleep than The Shining, but that's just my preference. But if you are a fan of the podcast, feel free to rate it, like it, whatever the thing is. I'm not really sure. I know on Apple it's rating. It might be rating on Spotify as well. Anyway, if you feel so inclined, that would be wonderful, but not necessary. And if you want to see the nonsense that I post on social media, I'm a lot more active on Twitter than I am on Instagram. But if you want to catch up with that nonsense, the podcast is on social media under M Murder Movies. So that's M as in massacre, Murder Movies on Instagram and Twitter. I hope that you have a wonderful week or weekend whenever you're listening to this, and remember to stay safe and stay spooky.